Welcome everybody to Bobby Talks, ... Those dots are there to tell you that there's always more to the story. And that is so true today when it comes to true crime. I'm sitting here with Kerrie Droban out of Arizona. I don't know specifically if she's from Scottsdale, if she's from Phoenix, but in the case of the true crime world, or crime in itself, she's a criminal defense attorney. She has her master's from Johns Hopkins. She's a former prosecutor. She is an award-winning author. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sitting here with Kerrie Droban. How are you doing, Kerrie?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great for a Monday.
Doing great for a Monday. Mondays are good or bad, depending on which way you look at it. I actually always tend to like Mondays. It's like a reset.
Yeah. Well,
Kerrie,
I always,
what part of Arizona are you from? Are you from Scottsdale? Are you from Phoenix? Where are you from?
I'm from Phoenix,
Okay.
from in the heart of the city, where the crime happens.
Kerrie, you are first of all, let me just say out loud, you're a badass human being because you have so many boxes that you check off. You are a criminal defense attorney. Did I want to make sure I said all these things correctly? Criminal defense attorney, correct?
Yes.
You
Yeah.
are currently and still actively writing nonfiction pieces. Is that correct?
Yes.
And yeah, and you were once a former prosecutor. So that's on the other side of the coin. Is that true in saying that as well?
That is correct. Yes. I've worn many hats, and it's helped me probably be a better defense lawyer, to be honest with you. Knowing the other side is always helpful.
No, that's a good point of putting it that way. I always feel like the best. I'm an educator, so I always feel like the people that become the best administration, the best principals, the best superintendents are those that actually were teachers at one point in time. So those that kind of lived through that pipeline, they kind of worked their way up to the other side. They kind of know how to make relationships and make decisions based on that. A little bit, I guess, better, for lack of better words. They're a little more educated in their decisions when it comes to that because they've seen both sides of it. So in your case, that's definitely true.
That is,
Which one did you? I mean, you're currently a criminal defense attorney, but did you enjoy your time as a prosecutor or what?
I actually have liked both sides of it, but to be honest, I think that criminal defense suits me better. It's more creative. And I think it's more people oriented, if I can say that. When I was a prosecutor, I was constructing a crime. When I'm a criminal defense attorney, I'm deconstructing the crime. So I'm
Right.
trying to, but both sides are telling a story. It's just using the same set of facts and telling a story from a different point of view. So I think they're both equally challenging. It's just that there's not a whole lot of interaction with, I guess you're interacting with victims' families, but it's much more in the trenches when you're a defense lawyer. So I prefer that. So it's pretty
Yeah.
challenging.
I like that you use the word creative, right? Because that's exactly what you kind of have to be, right? I can't imagine that anybody in their right mind grows up thinking, I want to be a criminal defense attorney. My passion lies there. But in this country, it's a civil duty, and everybody has the right to one. And in your case, you have to do it, and you have to make sure that you provide your due diligence, that you provide the best opportunity for those people in those situations. Do you find that difficult? I mean, obviously it is. I know it goes without saying, but answer my dumb question if you can.
Well, I think the single most frequent question that I get asked is, how do I sleep at night? So I get asked that all
Right.
the time, and it's really simple, is that I believe in truth and justice. And I think that, whether you're a prosecutor or a defense lawyer, you're still trying to follow the Constitution, make sure the person has a fair trial, make sure there's nothing prejudicial coming in, because you're right. I mean, that is what our country's founded on. Everybody has a right to a fair trial. Even if I think the person, 99% of the time is guilty, they still deserve that fair trial. So it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, people want to call it the dark side, working for the dark side. I don't really see it that way. I think it's an incredibly difficult job from both sides. And I was equally passionate when I was a prosecutor. I thought when I got into prosecution that I was going to be a career prosecutor. I mean, that's what I set out to do. But I did not like the politics of it. I felt that I had no discretion when I was a prosecutor, and that I had to kind of follow the party line and, take my cases to trial even when I didn't want to take them to trial. So it was very confined and constricted when I worked as a prosecutor. And I know that's not the case for, a lot of my peers, but that's how I felt when I worked as a prosecutor. And I definitely don't feel that way in the defense side.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting, because I was going to say I might, just off the top of my head, I would assume that as a prosecutor, you decide when and if something should go to court, because you're the end all be all there. I can't imagine being forced into something if you don't feel you have a strong enough case, just so you can, because maybe political lines are telling you that you have to do it to save face for some particular reason. That would be very difficult, because you'd be put in the middle of something where you might not think is, necessarily ready to go to court. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, that, and also, I mean, there are certain cases that are policy cases, for example, depending on what, DA's office or county attorney's office, you work for. There are certain cases that you're not allowed to plead out, or you can't plead out. There's certain mandatory sentencing guidelines that really restrict a lot of, what you can do as a prosecutor. So I think that's why I think it's, far less creative. So as a defense lawyer, I mean, I work for myself, so I have my own firm. I can pick and choose the cases I want to take. I can either negotiate something out to a plea bargain or take it to trial. So there's a lot more flexibility and freedom in doing that. But I've also worked on the capital side, which is death penalty work. And
Oh
that, of
man.
course, is court appointed, so I don't have a lot of freedom there. I mean, I don't have a freedom in terms of the cases that I choose, because I get the cases appointed to me from the Supreme Court. And so I have to work those cases. But as far as how to present the defense, I have a lot of autonomy in doing that.
Okay. Okay. That's good. I mean, you don't want to be micromanaged too much, right? No, none of us do it when we do a job. Um,
Yeah.
you said something though a little bit earlier that I just, I find to be fascinating in its own right. I cannot imagine, as a criminal defense attorney, when you are even yourself sure that they have committed this crime. And this is where I was going to get, because can one person ever truly, how do I want to word this? Can one person ever truly remove their own personal bias from the situation long enough to present or represent their client 100% the way that they should?
Um, are you asking me if the person tells me that they are guilty, can I still represent them? Or um, so, when I first started out in my career, I never wanted to know from my client. I never asked him that question. And I'm using him because, 90% of my clients were male.
Okay.
But I would go in and I would talk about the facts, and I would ask them what happened. But I would go in with the assumption that they're probably not going to tell me whether they did it or not. Some of them will. If they did it, then I'm looking for, can we plea bargain this out? What is you always have to have candor to the court. So you're never going to go into a case where if somebody tells me that they did it, I'm never going to go in and present a defense they didn't do it,
Right.
like presence or something, because it would be a lie. And
Right.
so a lot of times I will preface it with my client. I'll say, don't tell me. Don't tell me whether you did this or you didn't do this. So let's just operate in the facts and what the state can prove. So
Yeah.
it kind of takes me out of that equation, but definitely if somebody tells me they did it, I got to go with that. I got to go with
Okay.
that. But by the same token, if they tell me they didn't do it, I got to go with that defense, and I got to try to build that up. Sometimes I've had people tell me that a third guy did it. It's a third party defense. So even if
Right.
we can't find this phantom third person, that's the defense I'm going to go with. I'm going to go try to find, that third person. I'm going to send an investigator out to try to find this person. And that has happened on multiple occasions, and that's the defense, even if I don't even find the person, because that's what he's telling me.
That's what he's
So,
telling you. I can't even
right.
imagine being a private investigator and feel like you're being led on a witch hunt that doesn't exist. But you have to do your due diligence, both you and that person that's doing the PI. So I can't
Right.
imagine
Right.
that world. That's a very, very interesting world that you live in. The creative part of it, though, it just the puzzle. The people that like to solve puzzles and strategies, that part would be kind of fun, and I would think a little bit stimulating and interesting, to say the least. But I would say the same thing. I think I would go into the situation and be like, I don't want to, your thoughts on whether or not you did this or committed this crime are irrelevant. I just want the facts of what happened, what you're from your perspective and so on, because it is good to hear that if they presented with you that they're guilty, that you have a obligation to then represent them as a guilty person.
Right.
Does that always the case when it comes to criminal defense attorneys? Do they take pride in trying to get a guilty man or girl and make them innocent? Is there people like that in your profession, do you find, or do you not want to speak ill of your peers?
Well, I don't know if I can speak in general terms. I would think that most people are, they're trying to get the best possible defense for their client.
Okay.
So there are lots of obviously there's a lot of confidentiality that goes into communications between attorney and client. So there's a lot of stuff that makes it into that work product folder that is privileged, right? So there's not a lot of stuff that, not everything needs to be disclosed. So I'll give you an example. I represented a serial killer. I didn't know he was a serial killer.
Interesting.
I had this thing early on in my career. I would never go to the jails on a Sunday because it's kind of creepy. I mean, there's a jail here that there's not a lot of people around. You're kind of alone on that, maximum security level floor. But I had to go visit my client on a Sunday. Big mistake. I wound up going there, and the deputies had an emergency, and I am not even making this up. There was an inmate who got unruly, not my client, but somebody else got unruly on the floor, and they had to put a mask over him that was very much like Hannibal Lecter's mask. It looked like a kind of a Freddy Krueger mask, and they locked down the entire jail. So I was locked in with my client, and
oh,
so
wow.
it was like I was locked in. The steel doors were locked in, and I didn't know how long this emergency was going to last. But that was a situation where I'm locked in with this really like deranged killer, and the case was so crazy. He had chopped up his victim and had thrown the body parts in Roosevelt Lake. Okay.
Wow.
So I figured that this was my opportunity to talk to him about the crime. I'm locked in with him. I don't know when I'm getting out, and I am sure as hell not going to show fear.
Right.
So
No, you can't. Yeah.
So I took the opportunity to talk to him. And the first question out of the gate, I said, so let's talk about your murder. And his response to me was, which one? Okay, so that's a situation where he's just confessed to me of multiple murders. And because I don't represent him on those multiple murders and he hasn't been charged with them, I'm not going to say anything. So I never said anything about those other multiple bodies that were in Roosevelt Lake with the same MO. So that's a perfect example of what I'm able to disclose and what I'm not going to disclose. So I only talk about that one murder.
So Kerrie, let me ask you this question. How long have you been a criminal defense attorney?
29 years.
29 years. So this specific situation with this gentleman, how early, often, or were you into your career?
Probably 10 years.
Okay, so you had enough grit on you to know that that's how you need to respond in that situation.
Yeah.
Can you have been 100% certain that you would have responded the same way, let's say 5 years prior? Maybe year one, would it have been the same thing, or would you have been banging on the door trying to get out of there? How would that have played out?
I've thought about that a lot because that whole experience gave me a little bit of PTSD.
Yeah.
I never went back to visit a client on a weekend ever again. And I would always go in like the middle of the day, knowing that there were a lot of attorneys there. There were people there because it's a scary place. You can get left there. I mean, you have to be escorted in. And then when you're with your client on that maximum security level, there are not a lot of people around. And they will close in there with your client because that's confidential, right? And so it's just not.
Sorry, real quick though, even in that situation, you're saying there's not even a security guard that would stay in the room because of the client confident, or really?
Right.
Man.
So they leave you in there. And I always used to have this fear every time that steel door bolts.
Yeah.
no handles on the other side, you know, because they don't want the inmates getting out. And some of those cells on that floor are very like there's close contact. This isn't like, you know, Hannibal Lecter where you've got the plexiglass in between you. Like you're right there.
Right.
So it yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I think, you know, early on as a defense lawyer, I think that probably would have panicked me. You know, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I was panicked. I was panicked inside, but I just kind of assessed that situation, and I thought, I don't know how long I'm going to be in here, and there's nobody can hear me in here. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
I can yell and scream, and no one's going to know there's something going on. So it was just a very eerie feeling. You feel very vulnerable there, but you know, at the same time, I figure he's probably not going to attack his defense attorney because I'm there to help him.
You would hope not.
But yeah, but he was a creepy guy, a really creepy guy.
So, well, yeah, I guess I was going to go down the psychology route of that, and I want to here in a little bit. I want to go down the psychology route of why people commit violent types of crimes, crimes of passion, crimes of motive, crimes of, you know, whatever. I'm sure you have a laundry list of the different things that it could be. Maybe you can't speak on that specific gentleman, but like I can't assume in that you mentioned it that why would he want to attack his defense attorney? My question is he doesn't strike me as a guy who very much cares whether or not he's on the outside or the inside of this world. You know, whether he's inside or outside prison, he doesn't strike me as somebody who necessarily cares that. Is that a fair assessment of someone like him, or am I way off? Not to add to your
No, I think
PTSD
you're
by any
absolutely right.
means.
And I think that
Yeah.
no, I think you're right. And I think that is, you know, the real, I mean, you know, I'm a realist when it comes to that. I'm not a bleeding heart, you know, defense lawyer. And no offense to the bleeding hearts, but I am not a bleeding heart. And I really, I, I know what I'm dealing with. I know the level of danger that is there with the clients, you know. So I mean, so I've always taken some precaution, but you do feel vulnerable in that situation because you can't take anything in with you when you go into the jails. You know, I mean, same with the prisons. You know, a lot of my clients are in prison, but you know, while they're awaiting sentencing, they're in the jails, and we have a maximum security facility right next to the courthouse. So, you know, but you can't not visit your clients. So it always used to strike me as odd, and I'm actually grateful for COVID for this reason. But it used to
Yeah.
strike me as odd that we would have to go into the cells and be locked in with them. And you know, because I know I'm not alone in this fear of being vulnerable there. You know, but now during COVID, they have, you know, you can visit your client over a TV screen. So it's a whole different ball game, and I think it's a lot safer for a lot of us. But yeah, there are calculated risks that are taken all the time.
Well, Kerrie Droban, you take calculated risks all the time with pretty much every facet of your life. The very nature of the books that you have written and the stories that you have been a part of, and the information that people share with you, you are privy to a lot of things that not a lot of people are. Um, so there's something inside of Kerrie Droban that pushes her to the edge. And we'll kind of peel back some of those layers as we go. I wanted to transition. We're already 20 minutes into this thing. I want to transition a little bit back if we can. How familiar are you with the, because I want to talk about true crime, the Gabby Petito case right now that's taken the America by storm and just the world. And how familiar are you with it? Did we lose her? Can you hear me, Kerrie? She might be trying to figure out her remote right now. She'll pop back in when she hears us. Um, what we're going to do is we're going to transition over to the Gabby Petito case. If you guys are sitting there watching us, she might have to leave and hop back on if she can. Kerrie, if you can hear us, by all means, I'm going to have her jump off and then jump back on. But yeah, by all means, she is going to be somebody that is going to have a very good explanation of maybe how this case might unfold and how things might take place and handle themselves. So, Kerrie, are you there with us? Oh, she just hopped off. She's going to hop back on here as soon as we can. But But I was excited to have her on the show if we can. She's calling as we speak. See what happens here. Kerrie, are you there with us?
Sorry about that. I'm there. Somehow you froze.
No, that's okay. If that happens, just jump off, jump back on. We'll get you taken care of.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
I don't know how much you heard of me, but I wanted to talk a transition if we can. We'll come back to some more of that, your interesting work here in a little bit if we can. But I wanted to talk about the Gabby Petito case because it's kind of taken the world by storm. And I know there's this kind of true crime obsession within the zeitgeist of America. Maybe not just America, maybe within the world. But like, how familiar are you with the Gabby Petito case?
Probably as familiar as most people, just following the press releases and up to date a bit on that.
So are you somebody with something like
I'm
this?
probably part of that.
Well, I was going to ask you, are you somebody, being that your profession, that you are somebody who has a little bit more interest in it than maybe the normal average Joe? Or do you think there's a huge obsession with true crime in this country and that you find yourself behind?
I think there is a fascination with true crime. I think it's probably magnified a bit just because of the access to social media and other media outlets that we now have. I think it's just become front row center, and it is this sort of fascination. It reminds me a lot of horror films. People can disengage and watch from their living room, but they're also really fascinated by why people do the things they do. And a case like Gabby's is, here you've got a beautiful woman, a young couple, and they're so relatable. I mean, the majority of the true crime audience, I hate to say it, is women. And so I think a lot of women are fascinated by this story because they can relate on a lot of levels. I mean, here's a woman who's, basically recording in diary form her life story. So it's very voyeuristic. People like that idea. They like to be able to, they like to be front row center and part of that. And I think the fascinating part of it is, it's like we can relate to it, and yet we're so relieved that we can sit on our couch and be sort of, Monday morning quarterbacking it. So it's got all of those ingredients, but I think more than that, it also has this the puzzle element. I mean, we all know who did it, or at least we believe we know who did it.
Right.
But it's still out there. So I think there you can kind of play with some of those theories of what happened. I mean, it's not a who done it, it's maybe a how done it. What happened? Was it an accident? Was it premeditated? Was it domestic violence that just reached that, ultimate level? So I used to always like to say that, domestic violence is really one step away from homicide. So, so that's kind of the angle that I bring to that. I also think there was a huge missed opportunity by law enforcement, and not to, point fingers, but it frustrates me no end when I see that happening, because I think that it's all about education and it's all about training. I mean, for law enforcement to have encountered this couple, to have taken statements from them, to have actually believed Gabby's statement of it was my fault, I hit him. I mean, it just to me shows such a complete lack of awareness of what actually happens, with domestic violence. And so that part of the case is very frustrating, and I also think very relatable. And I just want to add one more thing to that. The other part that is fascinating to me as a mom is here's, I'm going to say the killer. Okay, I know he hasn't been convicted of anything, but his parents, who are complicit in his disappearance and in hiding him. So that, of course, raises all kinds of questions for, families out there, where you can ask the question, would I do the same thing? Would I have done the same thing? So it's just a really interesting case for all of those reasons.
Yeah, no, you hit so many things there, right? It's so fascinating to me. If just that day that when the Utah cops pulled them over, I believe it was August 12th. It doesn't matter the dates really. It was early into the month of August. They showed the footage. They released the part of the body cam footage that came out. And what was interesting was, you're right. You're looking at this distraught Gabby, who is she's admitting to OCD. She's admitting to having levels of anxiety, and she's clearly distraught. Now, that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean Brian isn't distraught. That doesn't mean that she was innocent or perfect in the situation, but it also doesn't mean that he wasn't either. So then when they go to Brian, he's cool, calm, and collective. And he's looks like he's almost trying to diffuse the setting. And, but what I find interesting is that there's that snippet of footage that came out, but then just here recently, I don't know if you've seen this, they actually revealed the whole footage of the conversation that took place. And I don't understand this, and maybe you would know this, Kerrie. Why would they only show us a snippet of the body cam footage and the conversations that took place between Gabby, the police officers, and Brian, the police officers? And then within the last couple of days, they reveal all of it. And if you look at all of it, it does kind of paint a different picture than what that first snippet does. Why did they do that?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I don't. I mean, there could be a lot of reasons. One is, they're holding back certain information, especially in a case where they're looking for somebody. They don't want to, reveal everything because they're looking for specific clues that might tip off the person.
Yeah.
So let's say, Laundrie's watching the news. I mean, I don't know if he is or not, but if they reveal something that is going to tip him off, they're not going to do that. So there's a lot of reasons that law enforcement will withhold certain facts or information. Um, I don't know. In this case, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there could be any number of reasons. There could be concerns over victim's family, for example. I mean, they didn't have a body really
Right.
when they released the beginning part of it. And now that Gabby's remains have been found, now they're releasing all of it. So, I mean, there's lots of reasons for that, but I don't think that it's anything nefarious. I don't think it's like manipulating the outcome of anything. I think it really is probably conscious decision on law enforcement's part when they have, what starts out as a missing persons case and
Yeah.
then becomes a homicide case. So now they want a collective, looking for now a different person. They're not looking for Gabby anymore. Now they're looking for Laundrie. So it changes the whole dynamic. But that would be my guess as to why that was, not revealed initially.
Yeah, because I was, doing my deep dive as I was doing, trying to prepare for this podcast, just so I can somehow sound intelligent next to Kerrie Droban, which is not going to be possible for me. But I just know that, like, what they said was that Utah law is that in a case of domestic dispute, in any scenario, one person needs to be taken in that evening. And nobody was in that case. And I'm not here to judge and say whether or not they should or shouldn't be. I think a lot of times when you have passionate people, young people, toxic relationships, whatever it might be, it might, we never know the whole story, right? There's always more to the story. Legitimately, Bobby talks, always more to the story. But in this case, there's always more to the story. So, like, I'm not here to say whether or not they should have went to jail or not. But if that is policy, it seems like they would have done. It doesn't necessarily mean that anything different would have taken place. Gabby Petito would not have been murdered. It just seems like I always come back to, like, police officers right now in this country are taking such a beating. And you would think from a PR standpoint that they would almost, I know their job is still to solve these crimes and still make the right decisions. But, like, if I'm a PR person for any police station or any, law enforcement, you would think that I would be fighting to say, just show the whole footage, or why didn't they go? That way you can kind of protect your own, because it's got to be hard, because now you have, like you said, interesting as a criminal defense attorney. It's interesting as a mother. I've heard, I don't know if you're familiar with Laura Richardson. She's talked a lot about how this whole thing might have been able to be prevented. I think that's too much to put on the cops, and it's kind of a stretch, but I don't know. It's very interesting that nobody went to jail that night.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that again is it is interesting. I mean, we have the same law in Arizona. It is a judgment call. I mean, I think there is, I mean, it's hard to say in 2020 hindsight, whether the cops made the right decision. But, um, I think that the big issue here is you've got, you know, Gabby who's saying it's all my fault. Well, you know, in domestic violence situations, that's a very common response for a person who's being abused to take that blame on, because their situation, their immediate situation, is going to be so much worse if they, say no, somebody else did it. I've been beaten, or I've been, abused, or whatever. So it's just an interesting from a psychological perspective too. You've got Gabby trying to protect herself, perhaps. I mean, I don't know the whole story either. I don't know. I mean, what I find really fascinating is that the police wrote it off as mental health issues. They
Yeah,
said Gabby was having mental health issues,
very interesting.
which is so infuriating too, from a perspective. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a very complicated psychological cocktail that's going on there in domestic violence situations. Whether she did get violent, whether she, levied the first punch, nobody's really going to know that story. But I think it's a missed opportunity, I think, from law enforcement perspective. Because as you say, if the law says one of them goes to jail, then one of them needs to go to jail, and then they can
Yeah,
sort out the
protect
issues
yourself,
later.
that just to make it easier on
Yeah.
yourself. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, I don't want to judge, and I'm not in the case to judge, because I would probably bet that in those situations they do their best all the time to kind of, you know, evaluate the situation, ask yourselves, do you feel like there's a pattern? I also think people should be rewarded for their, their past. If they don't have a criminal history, or if they don't never been in trouble, they've shown that they are a good citizen. A lot of the times, and maybe this is the first time this situation's ever taken place, I don't know. Usually in toxic relationships, that's not the case. But in this case, these two are not home, right? So I'm assuming that the communication from home to Utah doesn't make its way there. I don't know how it works with police officers, but yeah, it just there's so many different areas, and we
Yeah.
could
No,
judge
you bring.
that scene a lot. Let's fast forward to now and the circus that it has become. I'm curious as to your thoughts. So you kind of already alluded to it a little bit. You've used the term killer. Um, you're no doubt in your mind that Brian Laundrie is obviously. I mean, I'm just asking because of your, without a doubt, I guess is what we're looking for.
Yeah.
But no doubt in your mind that Laundrie is the killer, and it was there was motive behind it, or could it have been something that turned accidental, that turned into something more serious? And now, what are your thoughts on how you felt it played out based on what you've seen in your field?
Yeah, no. So I mean, I think that's a fair question. So I mean, I look at what the facts are. I mean, what is the evidence showing? And so it's showing consciousness of guilt on Laundrie's part. So whether he premeditated this or not is still up in the air. I mean, it's very possible they could have had a heated discussion. He could have gotten, he could have pushed her. She could have hit her head on something and died. So it could have very possibly been, um, an unintended homicide. But regardless, he drives back in her van and doesn't say anything for two
Yeah.
weeks. So that right there is pretty damning evidence. And then disappears, with the help of his family, who are still hiding him and still not coming forward and giving information. I think if somebody, even if it was accidental, I mean, I get it. Everybody points their fingers to the, significant other. That's a fact. But it was only
Right.
two of them out there. So, and then there's a suspicion of who gave him rides at various times and the lies he told the two people that picked him up and brought him to this location where they later found Gabby's body. So I think if you look at just the timeline and the facts of that, I think it's pretty damning evidence. But whether or not it's premeditated, that is definitely up in the air. It could definitely have been a heat of passion. Who knows who provoked what and how it happened. But it's the constellation of events that happened afterwards that I think really would be difficult to overcome when they find him.
When they find him. Is that what you said? When they find him?
So I have theories.
Let's hear them. I
Yes,
would love to dive into this. I have a few
I
of
think
my
when
own.
they
You go
find him,
ahead. We're getting Kerrie
so he's
Droban's
on the
theories
lam.
on where
He's not.
Brian Laundrie is, where he could be hiding, who's hiding him, or if he's even alive. We're going to get that live right now on Bobby Talks. Kerrie, go ahead. Floor is yours.
Oh my God. And I will get the mail. So no, I have some theories about this because I think there's some precedent for people that do this. So he's gone into the woods. He's not taken a cell phone with him. He doesn't want to be tracked, right? So I
Right.
think honestly, I think he could stay in the woods for quite a while. And when I say quite a while, maybe like through the winter, okay? So enough time to where the case dies down, people have stopped looking for him, at least not in the way that they are now. So he can kind of go incognito. So when he finally does emerge, maybe after the thaw, maybe a few months down the line, he will emerge with a new identity. He will find his way into some small podunk town, maybe 300 plus population, and he will bury himself. He'll reinvent himself. That's what I believe could happen because it has happened with people. And I lose. I mean, this is a crazy example, but look at Nazi war criminals, right? They disappear. They blend into the scenery. They form new identities, and pretty soon everybody forgets about them. But years later, something will tip them off, and something will resurface. And so I think that's a possibility for him if he doesn't die of natural causes before that. If he tries to stay out there in the wilderness, maybe living off the woods, the berries, whatever. I don't know what his history is. I don't know if he's like a survivor guy or anything, but there's a lot of possibility for him in the woods, short of a bear finding him. So,
Yeah. Well, that
so
that could
I think that would be a good plan if I was.
that no. I was just going to say that could
There's
very well
lots of
happen
possibilities, the
too.
elements here,
I
but I do think.
I did read that he was once prior or has survived out like in a survivor mentality for 2 months just eating crackers. He's mentioned this before, according to something that I did read. So yeah, very interesting. I was thought or I was under the impression that when they were looking in like the area where he was living down there in Florida, that I thought maybe he would have already been swallowed up by one of the gators that might have got him because he just was kind of on a panic, not knowing where he should be going. But when you talk about somebody that's drove back from Wyoming to Florida and has had this amount of time to kind of come up with something, he's got an idea of where he wants to go. I'm assuming that when he got back home to Florida, it was he couldn't have thought that he could just stay in the public eye. So to me, he definitely has a mission of where he's trying to go.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely think so. I don't think he's over the border though. I think he's here, in the U.S. But I mean, just in looking at how the media just will die down after a while. I think if he has thought this through, he's going to get some kind of communication through his family. That's what I believe. I mean, those are the only people that know exactly what's going on, and so they must have a plan. So that's where some of the cracks in this plan are going to come out, I believe. The more people that know about it, the more pressure that's put on it. Somebody's going to slip up somewhere, and they'll find him.
Let me tell you why I think. Let me tell you why, Kerrie, why I think it's going to be sooner rather than later. Have you ever seen the documentary Don't Fuck with Cats?
Yes.
So for those that haven't seen this documentary, basically Don't Fuck with Cats is a story about how the internet found this video of this person torturing cats. And they took such offense to it, did not like that somebody could do something so appalling, that they literally started looking and created a Facebook group of all the things that they could put together about the room in which the video was taking place, the wallpaper, the video, whatever was on the TV, the type of cigarettes that they could find. And maybe the media wasn't paying attention to this, but the internet always was. And in this case, Gabby Petito's body was found because the internet was paying attention. I just think the internet is literally everywhere now. and you're going to have a million more misleads than you ever did before. But with that being said, this dude, I don't know if there is a podunk town of 300 anymore that don't know that Brian Laundrie exists. You know, maybe there is, maybe I'm ignorant to the fact, but I just think everybody has a cell phone now. Everybody in the middle of, you know, Kentucky is doing TikToks. You know, I just think that there's nowhere to hide anymore. Big Brother is watching literally everywhere you go. I think the internet will find this dude within next couple weeks. I really do believe it. There's rumors that he's in North Carolina now, and people highly believe that. Who knows? You're going to hear he's all over the map. That I know, but I don't know. What do you think about that? Especially because the documentary "Don't Fuck with Cats" they end up finding this guy. Uh-oh, did we lose her? Oh, there she is.
Yeah, no, you raise a really good point, and I think it's interesting. Yeah, she's got a fan base, right? I'm sure she's got a fan base, and people are going to be hunting this down. I mean, you're right. I think that that is the wild card in this is social media, and I think he's in trouble. I think he's either going to have to stay in the woods for a very very long time, or like you said, which you know, I actually happen to know a town like that, but I'm not going to mention it. Might give him ideas, but yeah, I mean, I think he better run. He better stay hidden.
Let
But I
me
think his
let me
family's
ask
going to
this then.
crack before him. And you know what else is interesting? The holiday.
Go ahead, Kerrie. Sorry, we're kind of losing Kerrie here a little
Oh, I
bit.
was. Gonna say, oh, I was going to say that with the holidays coming up and winter coming up, I think that makes it an even stronger case that he's going to have a hard time out there. So.
That's a good point. No, that's a really good point. Especially if I can't imagine he's going north, but maybe that's the whole purpose, right? Is nobody's going to think he's going north. He'll just stay south.
Right.
Let's kind of transition a little bit over to the, you mentioned it a little bit with females and why they're so obsessed with, true crimes. Um, is it, because I do find that to be the case, is that I personally am not somebody who's obsessed with this. I have become obsessed with this case, but I'm not somebody who's necessarily obsessed with true crime, mainly because it's so happening so often. I don't necessarily need to look for more reasons to upset my day. And I feel like a lot of times when I watch these stories, it sits on my skin. I get so uncomfortable with it. I can't imagine that there's people out there that are capable of doing these things, which in his case is, I really do believe that there was some type of crime of passion. But who knows? I don't know the story of who convinced who to go on a road trip. I don't know how long this was you never know, right? Is my point. But in your career field,
Yeah.
how do you feel when it comes to these people that create these horrific crimes? Do they fit a certain mold? Do they have a certain character type? Is it some type of things that we probably wouldn't even think of? Maybe they're OCD, or they have some type of weird characteristic or some sort. Why do you think people are capable of creating such violent, heinous crimes? And it doesn't even have to be in Gabby Petito's case anymore. We can transition off of that.
Wow. Well, I mean, I think that there are all kinds of reasons, is the short answer. There are different kinds of criminals too. So if we stick with the ones that I mean, because we're talking about crimes of passion versus the serial killers versus the stalkers versus so there's all different kinds. But I can speak to a certain psychological profile of criminals that I've particularly dealt with, and that I think are very, you ask why women are compelled to watch a lot of true crime. And I think the sad thing is there are a lot of female victims, with this particular psychological profile that I'm going to talk about, which is the and I'm going to say typically it's the male killer. It does not always. Sometimes it can be the other way around. But just for purposes of this conversation, I'll just say the male killer who is, a narcissist or has some kind of deviance in his past. And so I always look to see what is that watershed moment in a person's life that turns them. So either, it's that whole thing, is somebody a natural born killer, or do they become a killer? And so I
Right.
think there are very, very few natural born killers, but they do exist. And I think they are the psychopaths. They're the ones that are indiscriminate in terms of who they kill and why they kill. They're just like white sharks. They're the white shark of the criminal world. They're out there and they're predators. And those are the serial killers. Those are the ones that have antisocial personality disorder, which is something that it's just their brains are different. They're molded differently. So there's not necessarily a thing in their life that is going to turn them. But then there are what I call the regular ones that have a traumatic event in their life, or they've had a horrific childhood, something that will turn them into the criminal that they become. So like, let's say somebody has been abused their entire life, whether it's sexually, physically, whether they've been a witness to domestic violence, these are generational things. That person then goes on to beat and abuse the person in his life because that's what he's learned. It's learned
Right.
behavior. And so that, unfortunately, we see a lot of, they don't, necessarily, they're not groomed to be a killer, but they become that way because that's what they've learned. That's the anger. A lot of this starts with rage, and it starts with like um, unchecked anger, I guess, if you will. So that's one category, and then there's one that has substance abuse issues. So you marry substance abuse with the deviant behavior, and you've got a recipe for disaster. You've got somebody who's volatile. One thing's going to trigger them, and unfortunately, you have a lot of these. And I'll just talk about the domestic violence ones that I've seen that turn into homicide. Those are relationships where people get into, and they don't. Lots of times the victim is blindsided by it. I mean, lots of times there'll be red flags, but sometimes they're blindsided. They get into a relationship and now they've just suddenly married Jekyll and Hyde. They have somebody who's, the minute that you voice an opinion or want to do something that's different from the person that they're married to, that creates, basically a Molotov cocktail, and so that is going to start the violence. So it really depends on the crime, and it depends on the profile and the background of the person who's committed the crime. And I kind of, in a way, separate those from crimes of passion, because crimes of passion, a lot of different things can trigger them. It's not necessarily, their dark deviant past, but people that premeditate murders or that are abusive in the marriage or the relationship that they're in, those usually have some triggers. They have something in their past that is going to turn them into that. So it's a kind of a convoluted response to your question, but there's no black and white, and that's the sad part.
Well, that's the part that makes it difficult to, to profile, to find. I mean, like I'm going to I'm going to walk tiptoe here just because I don't want anybody to think I'm making connections anywhere. But I teach in a school, and I say this all the time that the public education system at any given moment is the most fragile ecosystem that can exist, because you never know what took place the night before at home with any particular person. And then they bring that into a school. And a lot of times a school is their safe place, whether it doesn't even matter if they're being bullied in that school. It might be way worse what's taking place at home. So trying to identify early mental health issues and really taking them serious in providing the amount of help that's needed really is crucial, because not that they're going to grow up and be these heinous, criminals, but adults, they had to start somewhere, and that trauma had to start somewhere. And more times than not, I would argue that it probably didn't start once they became adults. So there's this pattern of behavior, this is, vicious cycle that kind of takes place. And I'm not really sure how we identify it, because you don't want to make that connection to what it could be. You're just kind of hoping that you can kind of cut it off at the knees and, kind of put them back on the right track. But we have such a huge shortage. I'm from Michigan. we have such a huge shortage of social workers, of mental health experts. You know, there, to get kids that seem to have a huge amount, not just kids, but people in general have a huge amount of mental health disorder. Um, the help that they need in order to get them on the right track. It seems at times to be insurmountable, and it seems at times to be, you know, kind of a, you know, a failure right from the get go. But you have to keep it up. It's noble in order to pursue it. But I don't know. I'm ranting now, but like, there's a lot there. I'm not really sure what more we can do in the public education system. Maybe you have some suggestions or advice of what we can do to better provide our students in our community with the help that they might be seeking.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up. I mean, I literally just finished writing a book about the Colorado movie massacre, the
Oh,
James Told,
really?
who was a mass shooter, and he was also a student. He was a doctorate student um, at the, and he didn't shoot up the students in the school, but he obviously had a lot of issues going into that, and wound up shooting, you know, all of the tragedy that happened at the Colorado movie theater. But to your point, you know, the book, when I was working on the book, I really kind of did a deep dive into that issue. You know, how do we prevent this? What do we look for? And you know, and so I was analyzing a lot of school shootings and a lot of students, that, you know, the backgrounds of a lot of these students. Is it mental health? Is it something else that we could do? And you know, honestly, the thing that keeps popping up is communication. You know, if you see something, say something. There has to be, you know, nothing is too obtuse or small to say anything, especially in this culture of social media where people are, you know, I mean, you mentioned cyberbullying. You know, people are talking, they're revealing stuff. They're usually, I mean, the commonality between all of these killers that I profiled in this book, they all wrote. They all kept journals. They turned in assignments to their English teachers, their, you know, whatever. All of that is relevant and important and must be shared, even if you think it's not. I mean, because it's a clue. It's a window into what is going on in their psyche, in their home life, and you know, and the really tragic reality of this is it's very difficult to
Yeah.
prevent, to detect, to stop, but we have to keep trying. You know, because those are the markers, those are the flags. And you're right, people on the front lines are the educators. They're the ones that are there, they're seeing it firsthand, and they're the ones that are able to speak up and say something and identify it and say, this something's not right, we need to look farther into this. And I think that's an incredibly challenging and also frustrating road, because there is so much that's protected by privacy, there's so much that you can't delve into. But I think that, you know, sometimes it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, you know, because it just is. I mean, these cases are really that challenging and that difficult, but there are clues. And that's kind of goes back to my point with that watershed moment. You know, what is going on in the person's life, that, or in their childhood? What's that one thing that's turning them, that they can't get over, that maybe they need help with? You know, the kid who's a drug addict or selling drugs usually has some trauma or something in their history that's causing them to try to escape through substance abuse or through, you know, so these things are all, they're all red flags for something else. So I think that, you know, you're in a prime position, and a lot of our educators are in a prime position, but it's also not all on your shoulders. It's just that you happen to be at the front lines and be able to see things that maybe parents aren't seeing because they're working so hard, or healthcare providers aren't sharing because of HIPAA laws. I mean, there's so many variables, but I wish that different organizations would work together to try to, you know, feed information, but they just don't. They don't on this level, and so that's, you know, that needs to change.
Well, why do you think that is, Kerrie? Why don't they want to communicate with each other?
I think there's fear. I think people are afraid of labels. They're afraid of being wrong, you know, and they also don't trust their own instinct. I mean, if and I'll give you a classic example. I mean, the the mass shooting at Virginia Tech, for example. I mean, Sang-Woo Cho was writing very graphically violent plays and poems. And his teachers saw this. They knew this was going on, but instead of, alerting other departments and saying, hey, there's something wrong with this guy, they simply removed him and had him tutored privately, So, I mean, and not to say that, that they should have done, should have known, because I mean, it's really hard to look at that stuff in hindsight and say, you know, this is what you should have observed, this is what you should have shared. But I think in that case was really like the one that drove home a lot of the changes, which is, communicate. The other thing that was interesting about that was Virginia Tech at that time wasn't asking for personal essays for admissions, and you can get so much information in personal essays and personal writings, and they would have learned a lot from this person had they required that. So I think, things are becoming too computerized, too standardized. They're missing that human connection that I think if kids were really compelled to share their feelings and talk about what's going on, I think there might be more awareness, honestly.
Yeah, because what I find, and to kind of echo what you just said, is that it doesn't matter even if we were to bring to the attention of Virginia Tech, this particular, I remember the story, I forget the person's name, you mentioned it. But even if we were to bring to their awareness that you writing this, you sharing this, means that I have to then share this with A, B, and C. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I tell that to my students now. I always say to them, like, look, those that feel comfortable sharing with me, they'll want to, Mr. Gifford, can I talk to you? And I'll always say, just so we're clear, don't incriminate yourself, because if you do, I have a responsibility. With that being said, I'd love to hear what you have to say. And 9 times out of 10, they tell it anyways. And the reason they tell it is because they want to be heard. And it almost sounds like what you're saying in these cases, and not all of them, I'm sure. But if these students feel like they've been going through their life, not students, but people feel like they've been going through their life and nobody's really either acknowledging their existence or acknowledging their voice or validating any of their thoughts inside of their head. Do they matter? Do they exist? All of these things. And if we keep being afraid to even share these with one another, I would rather overshare, right, than not overshare, because at least in that situation, you can put your head down at night saying, we did what we thought we could do. We thought that was the best. By turning ahead to it now, you're playing ignorant to a situation that might develop into something else. I think about like those situations where like Quentin Tarantino, okay, one of the great writers, directors of our time, of all time. And he has written some very brutal scenes and some very dark things that can come from only dark places. David Fincher, same way. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they attach themselves to those characters that they create. And early on in their life, when they were to write things of that nature and they were then told that it was going to be shared with someone else and somebody was to sit them in a room and talk with them, you would get a real sense real quick of who is suffering and who's not. Because at least from my firsthand experience, I can always, not all the time, but most of the time you can tell which students want to talk versus which students were just playing around. And in the case of Quentin Tarantino, he was more than likely the kid that just was playing around, just wanted to see if he could set something on fire. Where there's other kids that don't necessarily want to set things on fire. They want to be heard, but then they get to a point where it's like, oh my goodness, nobody even knows I exist. What can I do? So I don't know. Maybe you think I'm off. That's kind of my thoughts on the whole mental health issue, is that I just feel like it is noble. It is worth doing. The good news is in today's society, it does feel like it's, mental health is something that's talked about quite a bit. We might not know how to handle it yet, but we do acknowledge that it exists now, and that's a victory.
Yes, I agree. I couldn't agree more.
So Kerrie, you are somebody that I talked about earlier being a badass human being. You've written 6 novels now. Your 6th one will be coming out next year. Is that correct? 2022?
Correct. 2022 on the Aurora Massacre. The James Holmes.
Yes. Aurora, and that was in Colorado, correct?
Correct. It's on the anniversary. It's scheduled to be released on the anniversary. So
And for our listeners, she's talking about the that was the Dark Knight.
Yeah.
Yes, that was
However,
the second movie or the first movie? Second movie,
it
correct?
was the second, yes, the second one where the Joker was still alive.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of the times that brings it back to the old conversation of, does art imitate life? Does light imitate art? A little bit of both, probably.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's coming out next year. I kind of wanted to dive into some of your previous work.
Mhm.
Some of the biker infiltration stories that you have kind of taken on. How many books of those have you written?
Well, I've written about the big five biker gangs in the
Yeah.
United States. And so started out writing about the Hells Angels in Running with the Devil. That was, they're all slightly different, but they all deal with gangs as the centerpiece of the book. So, the first one was the first ever infiltration of the Hells Angels by law enforcement. And
Yeah.
then the second book I wrote was a rival gang, about a rival gang of the Hells Angels. It was the Pagans, who are on the East Coast. They're out of Philadelphia. And that was taken from the perspective of somebody who was raised in an organized crime family. In fact, his father was the founder of the Pagans. So that was fascinating to take it from that perspective. And then I wrote about the Vagos, Mongols, and Outlaws in a book that was later made into a television series called Gangland Undercover. So if you don't want to read the book, you can watch the series. So, and then I finished it off with The Last Chicago Boss, which is a book about the godfather of the Chicago Outlaws. And that is also being made into a documentary. So yeah, so I think I've covered the gamut of biker gangs.
Well, I was just curious the nature of your interest in these things, because I'm just looking at Kerrie Droban from afar. I don't know you. I've just met you today at 6:50. We sat down Eastern Standard Time. I'm sure it's 5 o'clock there. I just know that um, just through talking to you, that there's something about you that takes an interest in that. Where does that originate from? You're diving into things you talked earlier about when the gate closed behind you during that setting. It was very vulnerable. A lot of these stories that you're being shared with, that you're writing, or maybe some situations you've been in, these are some on the edge type things. What brings you to, or what motivates you to want to be a part and tell those stories?
Yeah. Well, it kind of happened by accident, or I should say serendipity, maybe. But I started out writing fiction and had written a couple of novels before I was approached. Every one of the books that I've written, I've been asked to write. So they're kind of a hybrid of true crime and memoir,
Okay.
with the exception of the first one, Running with the Devil, which it was written in third person as sort of an ensemble cast, but I was still asked to write that story. And I think there is, so I didn't know anything at all about the Hells Angels when I write it. It wasn't in my wheelhouse at all. I didn't think, but anyway, I was asked to write it because the operatives who were working that case were still undercover, and they couldn't sell their story while they were undercover. And at the time, I was a lawyer and was still am a lawyer, but they thought, we're going to come to you with this story. We know that you'll hold it in confidence. So I actually wrote that story kind of quasi undercover. I mean, I was thrown into the world of almost being a journalist, kind of a deep throat journalist, meeting the operatives sort of, dark areas and in places that I couldn't record anything. I could, it was a crazy experience, really crazy experience. But the really crazy part of it is that I was married to a homicide detective at the time, and he was also involved, unbeknownst to me, in an undercover part of that case.
Oh,
So
wow.
we were both working undercover in our various roles. And so when the book finally came out, that's when it was the big reveal happened. So we were having it was like the book itself is a story within a story, and my life was a story within a story. So it was a really odd experience, but it kind of launched my career. It was not very good for my marriage. So it launched my career. Um, and so the second, so one book, the pagan book came out of Running with the Devil because that person had read Running with the Devil and then wanted his story told, but from the perspective of a rival gang. And that was fascinating too, because that was, Philadelphia. I'd never been to Philadelphia. We had the time difference, and there was no way. So this was all improvisation for me. I didn't know how I was going to do this really. I mean, it's not like you can go to the library and read books on biker gangs, I mean, this was like complete, first impression novice. And so I delved into this very crazy world. And, I mean, at one point I had I have a really good friend of mine who writes romances, and she and I used to be in a critique group together, and we would get there and we would say to each other, okay, I don't know how to write another fight scene and make it original. Like I'm writing so many fight scenes. Like, how do you do that and keep it fresh? And she would be writing so many sex scenes, and she would say, how do you do that and keep it fresh? So we would be exchanging our manuscripts. It was crazy. So, there's so many stories that came out of writing all of those books, and they're all crazy. I mean, the pagan book was probably maybe the most sort of edgy, because I had to write that one. The time difference made it difficult. So I had to write that one in my closet on little sticky note pads, because my husband at the time did not know I was writing the second book. So, again, is another like secret world. I had to fly that person out to Phoenix, interview him in a hotel rooms. I mean, it was just really, there's a lot involved in what behind the scenes. In fact, I do a talk called Doing Time for the Crime. And I go into detail about all of the behind the scenes stuff. I even developed a workshop. It's on my website. If you go to kerriedroban.com, there's a true crime writing workshop where I give away a lot of my secrets and tips of how I was able to write these stories about these, people that, I mean, you've got to figure there's not that many women involved. The women that are, associated with these biker gangs, they're property of, so I mean, the
Right.
fact that they would tell me their stories is pretty extraordinary. So, and I'm still friends with a lot of them to this day, which is even crazier. So,
That is kind of crazy though, because I can only imagine you, who would never be property of anybody, having conversations with these
right.
females privately or separately, and that might get them in trouble. I don't know. I just know that you are definitely cut from a different cloth. Who and what do you do? And we'll kind of wrap this up here in the next 5-10 minutes. Kerrie, this has been a great conversation. I just wanted to say I completely appreciate you being on the show, if I haven't said that already. But um,
Thank you for having me.
what does Kerrie do? What do you do to make sure that you keep your mental health in check? Because writing these books on such dark dark places, and then doing what you do for a living, how do you escape it? I know you said you alluded to that you have children. I don't know the ages, but like what do you do to make sure that you relax, that you're checking your mental health in? Because that's who, I mean, that is super important as well, not just the people that you're servicing, but yourself, so that you can continue to do it and do it at a happy, healthy pace.
Yeah. No, that's a really good question. I actually get asked that a lot, because there has to be a place for a lot of that stuff to go. So one of the things that I love to do is I hike a lot. I like to get
Okay.
out in nature. I find it very peaceful, and a lot of times I will hike, you know, different. I mean, during COVID, I hiked all the time, but it's just sort of an escape for me. And I'm also, I would say I'm a very spiritual person. And so I think I'm very grounded spiritually that way. And I think that helps me to keep a lot of things in perspective and in check. So I think those two things really help a lot. But mostly just a lot of, exercise, getting outside, not being cooped up, as I spend a lot of time writing and being behind a computer. So it's really important for me to get outdoors, some fresh air.
Yeah,
So
fresh air is huge.
yeah, nothing too crazy. I don't skydive or do anything like that.
Really, I would assume that you're an adrenaline junkie based on the things that you seek in your information for your content. Um, I'm a huge person that likes to travel. Talking about the obsession of this particular case, I think what gravitates me to the Gabby Petito case was just the fact that, I'm a dreamer at heart. I'm a traveler at heart. I like to see and just feel like, nature and things that are greater than me and observe and, kind of take them in if I can, so to speak. So, you have this girl who's speaks to my very soul as far as adventure goes. And out in those particular parts of the world, it could really be anybody, could be found in those situations. But we've been there and talked about that and covered that. I just know that, make sure that Kerrie, you keep on your mental health. I'll keep doing the same thing. Just again, thanks for being on the show. Do you have any final say? Do you want to promote where we can see you? Where can people follow you? How can, I didn't tell you this, but we've had 100 comments popping up on my right-hand side here. And one of the comments said, you're now their favorite author and they don't even know it yet. So they're going to go check out some of your stuff. Where can people find your work? Where can people find Kerrie Droban?
Well, the easiest place, probably where everything is compiled, is on my website, kerriedroban.com. If you click on the news or the media kit, you'll see a whole list of all of the television appearances and book reviews. I mean, there's just been a ton. And I should say, I'm going to be appearing in a show on October 14th called Indefensible. And it's going to be airing on Sundance TV and AMC Plus. So it should be an interesting take on a true case that happened in Scottsdale. So I'll be narrating that and giving some comments on that. So that's it.
That is awesome. Congrats on that, by the way. Congrats on the documentary that's going to be coming out too. I went to school for TV, film, and radio from Bowling Green before I went to become a teacher. And this is just kind of part one of many things that I'd like to do down the road, documentaries, things of that nature. So I'm very excited that your work is getting created into different platforms and very, happy for you there, Kerrie. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. This has been really fun.
Yeah, it's been a blast. She's going to stay on. We're going to get off the air here. Her and I will talk off camera here, but just as always, for those of you that have been on with us live, I think this was the most successful live show that we've had. A lot of that is attributed to Kerrie and the content that we covered. Bobby Talks, ... You know the story. There's always more to the story. You guys can catch me. Subscribe. Go to Spotify, Google Play, Apple Playlist, Google Podcasts, all those things. Go there and make sure you leave a review if you can. Take 5 seconds, leave a review. Go to Apple Podcasts, leave a review. That way we can kind of get this show growing on the audio platform as much as the YouTube. And if you're new to the YouTube world and Twitch and Facebook, follow, like, subscribe, do the whole thing. So Bobby Talks, ... Always more to the story. We'll see you on down the road. Thanks.